Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health, Bass and Associates, and Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Consider this: the largest school bond issue in the history of the state will be voted on next Tuesday. Hello, welcome once again to this special one-hour edition of Consider This. And we are at the Milo Bale Student Center with folks going to talk about the school bond issue, why it should pass, why it shouldn't pass. My guests today in favor of the bond issue, working very hard for it, are David Kramer of the group Yes for Kids, constructed especially to get this bond issue through. Also, one of the key personnel and volunteers, community people, Steve Pittler with Yes for Kids. On the other side of the issue, concerned about the cost and other issues, are Doug Kagan of the Nebraska Conservatives for Freedom. And also with us today is a man who bills himself a former PTA president. That's a fact, I'm sure. An involved parent, also a fact. And he says a lot of other things, but they're probably not germane at this point. I want to welcome you all today. I'm going to start out with you, David. You came on board this big bond issue, having worked with the Republicans in town, leaving town on some very worthwhile work and coming back. Your first gut feeling as to why you should have jumped on the bandwagon?
Well, my first gut feeling was that this was the right thing to do, that Omaha Public Schools have put together what I consider to be a very targeted, conservative approach to ensuring that the facilities in our district are usable well into the next century. And when I first considered taking on this project, I sat down and had discussions with a number of different people beyond the committee to find out the factors that were going in, what was the underlying information under the student assignment plan, why the necessary amounts, where were those monies going to be targeted, and had to satisfy myself initially that this was something that was worth supporting. And I was able to reach that conclusion pretty easily, to be honest. And that's why I came aboard. I think this is a great project.
Now, in case you haven't heard, this $254 million would be an effort to make a school assignment for racial balance and equality and equity in the city of Omaha come to fruition. It came to pass with the work of a lot of people, including a desegregation task force and our superintendent, John McKeel. Just so you'd have to be an ostrich not to know that this is to take us from busing cross town at various levels in the OPS education, and some voluntary busing, which will remain in effect. We'll go through that, to more of a neighborhood emphasis.
Right. This plan, there are two really components that are intertwined here. You have the underlying student assignment plan, which does just that. It returns children, elementary school children primarily, back to their neighborhood school. In addition to that, it expands the current magnet program. It offers parents choice. You don't have to go solely to the local neighborhood school. You have the opportunity to choose between 7 and 10 other schools in your zone. And so on the one side, you have the student assignment plan. We create academies, which are schools where there will be reduced class size in areas with a lower socioeconomic level. And you have that on the one side. That's the assignment plan. In order to pay for that plan and ensure that education continues to be equitable in the district, there is a facilities improvement project to that, and that's what this bond issue is about. And it covers several key areas. It's a renovation of 17 elementary schools, the average age of which is 61 years old. These elementary schools are, the majority of them are older than World War II. We will construct 3 new elementary schools, 2 new elementary schools, both in southeast Omaha. We will renovate 3 middle schools, construct 1 new middle school in northwest Omaha, and we'll renovate 4 high schools. And so that's that's where the dollar figures came up to, and to put before the voters, with $254 million.
Okay, Doug, this is a lot of money, there is no doubt, and the Nebraska Conservatives for Freedom are, among other things, not just issue-oriented, but spending-oriented.
That's right.
Looking to keep that cost in line for a number of things, not just school districts. Why did you decide to go forth and you're sort of, I guess, spearheading this effort locally to oppose it?
The $254 million bond issue is really a spending spree that, by the time you count the principal and interest, is going to total over $500 million. It's just way too much money to ask for the taxpayer at once. Property owners in OPS right now pay about 55% of their total property taxes to OPS. We're getting to the point where you have elderly people and others who either cannot or do not want to pay these spiraling property taxes, who are leaving the district. They have to sell out and move out of state. I know people who have left Omaha because the property taxes are too high. On the other hand, you have people moving into this area who don't want to locate in OPS because the property taxes are too high. And this not only will affect people moving in, but companies looking to move into the area. Because companies, large companies, look at the taxes before they move their management people into a locality. They understand what all property tax payers will understand soon, and that is this bond issue really is a quadruple body slam in taxes for the average taxpayer. You have the average tax will go up $138 for many years on a typical $100,000 home.
Now this is $138 a year, you're saying.
That's right.
Is that
for many years.
something, at least we can get an agreement on the amount, or is there some question as to the amount?
No, I don't think there's any question as to the amount. The average home in the Omaha Public Schools is valued at $60,300. So the cost for that home is about $85 a year once this plan is fully in effect, and that would take about 5 years to get to there.
At this point, I just want to mention that one of the things I always like to avoid is, and yet I want you to get your point in, is long speeches. Now, if you want to do that, fine, I might interrupt, but I want everyone to join in like a discussion, because you're all civilized people.
Carol,
but I also want to get to
I'd like to jump
my other
into
two
the discussion from a totally different perspective. While I have Doug's aversion to taxes, I happen to share their interest in the growth of better education in town. But the premise of your first question, I think, is erroneous when you said you would have to be an ostrich with your head in the sand not to know about what's happened to the bond issue. In actuality, the bond issue was never discussed and never quantified until February 23rd. At the school board meeting on February 23rd, it was done in 49 minutes of closed session in a private meeting. I attended 9 forums, I believe there were 8 or 9 forums prior to this, in which we discussed desegregation. Brenda Consul, who headed desegregation, as one of the principals, said at no point in time did she know that the option of dropping busing or $254 million worth of bond issues were on the table. So they weren't discussing this bond issue, and they weren't discussing this renovation program. They were discussing desegregation. Then they found out how unpopular busing was, and they decided what they would do is paddle onto the back of the anti-busing people and take an opportunity to build a Christmas tree bond issue and spend $250 million for a wish list which has been in existence for several years, which has not been common knowledge, which has absolutely no correlation to better education. I cite you the example of how this bond issue was done. Okay? The people out west got the no busing promise. The people to the north and to the southeast got the new schools promise. The people at Central, who were incapable of raising private monies to air condition their school, got promised $20 million there. The people at Burke, who were incapable of raising private funding for their additions, got $30 million there. And what they did was they built an aggregate bond issue and made it so loaded with Christmas trees that it really resembled congressional spending.
Well, that's what kind of comes to mind. But Steve, I would guess that you would take some issue with this, how this came to. The chronology, as I remember, is fairly accurate. in
I have
terms-
the chronology here in the records
because
and the minutes of the meetings.
I also remember just from the coverage that I was involved with. But Steve, your
You
comment
want me to
on
respond?
Well,
I get the
I
advantage
thought
of
that's what
going
you were here
last.
for.
I would love to. And whether the chronology is correct or not correct, and all, for the benefit of the doubt, say, okay, everything you say might be true in chronology. The purpose of the steering committee that I represent, and the real crux and the real subject at hand here, is not what promises necessarily were made, because I've never seen any documents filled out to any portion of the city saying you are going to get this versus you are going to get that if you agree to this bond issue. The bond issue was submitted after the board and the superintendent deliberated for a couple of years with different community committees that were called to examine whether it be the desegregation or some of the other equity issues within the district. But the whole bottom line here is, and my purpose in serving on this committee is to promote to the community, is this the right thing to do? Regardless of any back deal doors or blackmail that people claim that went on, let's take a look at the real issues here. And is there a need for the items that are being proposed through this bond issue? And I would challenge anyone to take a look at the schools that are targeted, whether they be in North Omaha, South Omaha, or West Omaha, and take exception with some of the items that are put on the table that are proposed for improvement in this district. And furthermore, I would challenge anyone to challenge the intent of the bond issue in terms of establishing equity in the urban school district in Omaha, Nebraska, and saying that the things that are proposed here will not result in positive things for the district. And I want to make one other comment. We don't have to debate the tax portion, but I continually hear that people are moving out of the Omaha Public School District into adjoining districts because they are being overtaxed. And I want to remind everyone that when this bond issue does pass, Omaha Public School District will still be well below the mill levy of any surrounding metropolitan district. So if anybody has any plans of putting their houses up for sale and moving out to Millard or to Ralston or anywhere else, they're going to end up paying more taxes.
And that includes with the additional money
that is correct.
for the bond
and
issue.
I think if we're going to talk facts, let's talk facts today.
Well, and
Let's talk apples to apples, too.
one other fact, just
We'll let
to
you have
clarify.
plenty of time.
You know, the total money allocated in this bond issue for high schools is $35 million. It's not 30 at Burke, it's not 20 at Central. The total monies allocated for high schools, I believe, is $35 million. And we can look at what we can look at the plan, and you can see that that's the figure for high schools.
All right, we'll run down if you want to respond, but I want to run down. We'll run down some of these things.
Can we
so
do
that-
before we respond to individual numbers and things? Steve discounting the process is somewhat offensive to me. You know, the process is important in democracy, and the process has not been well handled. In 83 days, people were given 83 days to decide on a $254 million bond issue. And you say this is the right thing to do. I agree with him that $250 million is the right thing to spend, but that's not very big thinking when you think about restoring the boiler in a building built in 1906. We're in the 21st century, moving to an era of telecommunications, video conferencing, when boundaries are no longer physical, and the best recommendation we can come up with is let's renovate schools and let's return populations to what are essentially homogeneous racial and ethnic centers. And I disagree with the whole process. I think, fine, you want to spend $300 million? I'm great with that.
Then you're saying that.
Stand back and let's think big.
Then you're saying that busing should remain in effect because
Busing remains in effect under this plan. They won't discount the importance of busing in
there
their
will
plan.
be busing.
Yes.
It will no longer
There will
be
be
compulsory.
movement of students.
Yes, but remember this. The district spends about $6 million on mandatory busing now. OPS will not take that $6 million and put it into school renovations or give it back to the taxpayers. They're going to take that $6 million and maybe more, and they're going to start voluntary busing from one end of the district to the other to these magnet schools. That's not even the purpose historically of magnet schools.
Well, mile for mile, what are we talking about?
Well, we don't know that, and we don't know that because the parents, you know, if 100% of the students choose to go to their neighborhood schools, there is no increase in the cost of busing. We anticipate several savings. approximately $6 million in savings from the mandatory component, approximately $3 million in savings from the consolidation component, which is the busing that was offered to students primarily in Southeast Omaha when all of their schools were closed in the mid-1980s. Laidlaw has already said they expect to save $1 million in transportation expenses just from efficiencies created by the zone concept. So we're talking about $10 million in savings, which will be utilized to offset some of the additional expenses that are present in this in the plan.
Additional teachers?
Additional teachers by reduction of class size and the like. On the transportation question, and let's focus on transportation first, Omaha Public Schools is proposing to transport students who, at an elementary level, who live more than 1.5 miles away from their home. We will transport middle and high school students who live more than 2 miles from their home. That is higher levels than any of the surrounding school districts currently do, but it is consistent with the type of transportation that's being provided. But we will not know whether there's an increase in cost, a decrease in cost of transportation until we see where is it that parents have chosen to send their children.
And if we could say, while we're on the topic of we don't know, I think that Doug and I have clearly established that we don't know how much academy schools are going to cost. We don't know how much demand there's going to be for growth in the operating revenue budget. And we don't know how you're going to preserve equity at the same time that you're creating 15 schools with 15 students per classroom based on economic disparity at the same time that you're expecting my child to go to a school with 27 or 28. It's not a question of equity at that stage. It's a question of social engineering, which is the same thing as what we have now, but it's geared from a different perspective. And how long do you think populations to the west will be acceptive of a great outflow of resources?
Well, let's deal with the issue of quality education. From my tours of the city, and in all those years of reporting, I've not been in every building, but I have been around them and at least to the principal's office and a lot of, that there are inferior facilities in this district. I mean, if you're comparing, you don't necessarily even have to go east to west. You can look at some of the schools. Is there not some responsibility to at least bring the schools somewhat on par from a plant point of view?
One would think
respond to
that
that first?
responsibility, yeah. Let Steve go.
Yeah.
We're fine with that.
Well,
I'll just respond directly to your question, Carol, because David brought up about the 1920 and 1930 era schools. Let's put those aside for a minute, because I don't think anyone will argue that a school that was built 60 or 70 years ago obviously needs attention. But let's talk about a school that maybe was built 30 years ago. Let's talk about Burke High School. It's on this list that needs to be fixed. And people say, why in the world would we have a bond issue to put money in one of the most affluent schools in one of the most affluent areas in town? And my response to that is, how many people out there built or bought a new house 30 years ago and have not essentially sunk a dime into that house in the last 30 years? Probably there would be very few people who would raise their hand and admit that. And if they did, my next question would be, what needs to be repaired in your house? Because we know after 30 years things need to be repaired. Case in point, Burke High School is a wonderful example of that. That aside from the schools that are 50 or 60 years old, what is going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years with our schools that supposedly have been on the cutting edge here in the last number of years? They need attention. The infrastructures are starting to literally fall apart. And to try and educate kids in an environment where ceilings possibly could be falling down, which they're not doing, but where the air conditioning or the heating systems are not regulated very well. My children attended Burke High School, and I can tell you those are real life stories. That's what this is all about.
Well, let's examine why there wasn't preventive maintenance in the schools in the first place.
I can't speak to that. That's not the idea of the bond issue.
I'll be happy to speak to it.
I was
when you're
going
done.
to ask that
Go ahead.
because there's a building and site and building fund, building and site fund.
But if a person owns a house and you have a start to get a problem with your plumbing, you fix it. If you have start to get a problem with your electrical system, you fix it. Here we have schools that haven't been attended to for years and years because of the forced busing, and now OPS is coming back to us and say, oh, we have boiler plants that don't work. Well, in the papers at 18 years old, and the building engineer said it's no good. It's only 18 years old. Why is that boiler not good after only 18 years?
If I could just respond very quickly, just from my experience on being on the school board for 4 years, I don't think people just created these this wish list overnight in terms of priorities in the district. Even when I was on the board a number of years ago, each year priorities were identified in all 70 to 80 OPS schools, and they were actually put in a list form with priority given. And probably the boilers that we're talking about today under this bond issue have probably been on that list for the last 10 or 15 years. And it was, I cannot speak, and I don't think the intent of this bond issue is to speak for the past in terms of who did what and what money there was to go around that maybe didn't get spent. All we're saying now is we have identified the priorities and the needs. Let's go forward, even if we have to be a little bit accountable for things that weren't done in the past, and let's get it done.
Well, but I would also like to say that the Omaha Public Schools would be happy to put their school buildings up against any other school district in the country that has buildings of a similar age. We've maintained those schools. We've maximized the existing facilities to the best possible. In the last 25 years, the Omaha Public Schools has made more than $250 million worth of capital improvements to the school district.
Some of that an additional bond issue.
Well, yeah, only 55 of it came from a bond issue in 1988. The rest of that came from continual allocation out of the site and building fund into maintenance. The Omaha Public Schools cannot do the site and building fund any longer because the state statute has changed that. The state is now saying to OPS and other school districts, because there are really two ways to finance capital construction. One is to go out to bond, one is to set money aside from the general fund. Millard and OPS are studying contrast. Millard goes out to bond every other year, and
They're also growing.
They are, but we'll
Really
talk about let's talk about that. OPS pays for it on a pay-as-you-go basis out of site and building fund. The state statute is now saying we don't want school districts to pay for things out of general fund. If you want to make capital improvements, you need to go to the voters. So here we are to the voters to say, here are the major priorities that we've got here.
I think that we far too easily dusted aside two questions there. One is accountability, and two is dependability. And we can tag accountability exactly where it belongs, okay? In 10 years, there's been $2.5 billion or more spent by OPS. Dr. Langen was chairman of the board for the last, or was on the board for the last 8 years. Other board members have been there longer. The improvements weren't made. Dr. Langen's, or Dr. McKeel's resume will read that he's had budgetary responsibility since the year 1988 in the schools, okay? Why, for purposes of accountability and management, did you build 2 new schools at Fullerton and Picot, 10 blocks apart from each other, at the same time that you knew that the population to the northeast and the southeast was suffering, unless at that point in time the pinnacle was swinging in such a fashion that you were catering to the white western suburbs.
That's not true.
And that's why you built those schools.
That's not
because
true.
now Picot will be amongst the smallest enrollment elementary schools in the district.
That's not true.
Let me respond also, because I was on the board 8 years ago when those areas were brought to us by the developers and saying, here's what we have in mind the next 10 to 15 years. This is the population trends. I remember the day that one of the developers came to the board and said, here's our plans for the next 15 years. You better get it in gear, OPS, because we're going to have a lot of kids here. Now, whether at this given year, and I can't confirm or deny the statistics of the enrollment at these schools, but there is no question that the growth in those areas has changed dramatically in the last number of years, and if you look ahead to future years, it's going to continue to mushroom.
But that doesn't address the question of leadership. At what point in time was it leadership's responsibility to say, we need to do these repairs, people? We cannot spend this. They should have come to us earlier.
They have been doing that.
Okay, we're going to have a standoff on that. We're going to have a standoff on whether repairs were done in a timely and appropriate fashion. We're going to have a standoff, I think, on
everything probably.
And you've
No,
put
we
it
both agree
forward.
when it's done, we'll be friends.
You've put it forward about the issue of John McKeel, how long he's been affiliated with the budgetary process.
Well, but
Okay,
and that
can we finish that up one way?
sure.
Anything
But
you wanna
I mean,
add
I
on
guess
that?
yeah, I would say that Dr. McKeel was not the superintendent until 2 years ago, and there have been dramatic changes in this district in the last 2 years since he took over. Changes like the reduction of the number of administrators in the TAC building by a third. He's proposed to eliminate mandatory busing and go back to neighborhood schools. I think that that's an impressive accomplishment, and one of the reasons why we should be supporting this plan is because he has, now that he's out, that he is no longer subject to the employment of another person who was the boss, he's now taken things a different direction.
But
And he
Carol,
should be
you
applauded
have,
for that.
You have to look at precedent. They're doing the same thing now as they did back in 1988's bond issue.
Well, I thought that was kind of a nifty bond issue. I thought it did
Well, they're
accomplish a lot
pulling
of
the
good
same
things. I mean,
tricks.
I'm not trying to be biased, but
What they're doing is they give you know, how many millions for each school they're going to improve, but they won't itemize anything, and that's what
Oh,
cost the.
He's got it right there.
I have a
You've
general
got it.
itemization.
He's
not a
got the
specific-
itemization.
specific. But the point that he raises about the coincidence or the management of the 1988 bond issue, that's not even open to discussion. It was poorly managed. The school system has admitted it was poorly managed. Cost overruns mitigated the total amount of the expenditures that were available, and now you're talking about doing a bond issue 3 times the size.
But
So
you
we've
know
all
what
agreed
they
you need to
did
be
in
more
this bond
vigilant.
issue, and that's interesting because they learned from their experiences in 1988. In 1988,
You're gonna
they
put
didn't
that in
project.
writing,
I
the
did. Well, you know
guarantee?
what? Just compare the two documents, the two bond proposals, and you'll note that in 1988 there was no consideration taken for the fact that this was a 5 to 7 year plan. And so now you've got included in this plan monies that take into consideration the fact that it takes 5 to 7 years. There's inflation during that period. Costs go up. And so I think that OPS, you know, they say they admit that it was poorly managed. Okay, you know, I don't know if that's true or not. But the point is that this plan specifically identifies where the monies are going to be spent, and it takes into consideration a whole host of factors that weren't taken into consideration in '88.
okay, I'm sorry, we've used about half of our time, so and there are some items that
Move
now
on.
that I've let you sort of, you know, breeze into out sort of a stream of consciousness discussion, I want to ask you about a few things that, and I will tell you, bring up comments that people have made to me. One comment regards the issue of time, the amount of time to decide. I mean, this could perhaps be the most perfect bond issue, but there is a feeling out there among people that I've talked with that, you know, I don't really feel comfortable as a voter, a taxpayer, that this is going to accomplish. And I'll give you an example. One parent just told me this week, my children will be attending, I think it's Rose Hill, and the principal, Mr. Akamo, I believe she said his name was, does not even know they're going to have BD there, BD students, about 4 classrooms, behavioral disordered. And they're also going to have regular students. And the parents in that area, which is somewhere north of Country Club or somewhere around in there, don't know, are a little unsettled, not that there will be behavioral disorder necessarily, but they don't know what the character, you know, what the makeup of the school is. The principal doesn't even know. Now, granted, there are some question marks because we don't know how many are going to go to their sort of home school, their neighborhood school. But they feel that if the principal can't even answer some basic questions, then how can they feel comfortable voting for it?
Well, I think the
Well, what would
original
you say to
question
these
that you
parents?
raised, Carol, is a legitimate question. When people say, why the rush? Why all of a sudden do we see this thing trying to be stuffed down our throats, which it's not?
I mean, it's got to be more than interest rates, although that's one of the
Obviously,
reasons
the
touted.
bond market and what happens to that dramatically affects what it costs to implement a bond issue over the life of the bond issue. And right now, things are very attractive, so we can't disregard that. On the other hand, people need to realize that this was not born overnight. It was born out of thought over the last couple years. This was not something that emerged from the boardrooms in the last few months. And more importantly, people need to realize in order to fully implement this bond issue, you are looking at a process. The day after this bond issue passes, everything is not going to be in place. It will just start. And it's going to take up to 5 years to really complete everything out under this bond issue in terms of implementing all of the things that need to be implemented. Granted, if we would wait 6 months or a year, let the public have an opportunity to study it and to come forward and ask questions, maybe some areas would be addressed, but there would be a lot of other areas that would be lost out upon. And the only thing I can say that I'm disappointed in, I think the other side will also agree, we have tried to be as conspicuous as possible the last few weeks in trying to bring the issues to the table, and the turnouts and the interest has been very disappointing. So people are saying, why don't you give us more time?
I'm going to ask the question about the turnouts in a moment and how you each perceive that, but any response to...
The time, once again, we have to go back to the process. If you repeat something often enough, people will start to believe it. And believing that this $254 million bond issue tied to the DSEG plan happened over a period of several years is one of those things. I have brought the minutes of the board meeting with me. And there is no discussion of a number until February 20th, and on February 23rd, the number is quantified in a special session at 254,000 after paring the list down from 401,000. So I think that we should put a disclaimer on that we've been 254 million, that we've been discussing this forever. And if it's your child who is looking for the BD program, or in the case of the English as a second language kids, you're talking about mainstreaming them in neighborhood schools. We don't have sufficient English or Spanish-speaking staff or para to handle those. So I can concede that you guys want to do good things for the kids collectively, but if you're the parent of one of those children, do you really want it changed? Do you want the decision made in 89 days? I called my homeschool today and said, how many third grades, fourth grades, and fifth grades will you have? I do not know. Have you submitted an operating budget? I've fitted one in partially. Please, corporations don't decide $254 million issues in 90 days. And to say, if we had brought this to the public, as if the public were a third party to the transaction, is ridiculous. The public is the principal in the transaction. So yes, it should have been brought to the public. I object to the process which sought the endorsements of private individuals and organizations by sending board members and maybe their associates around.
Well, but you know, the school board didn't just one night in a closed room reach out and pick out this number and say, that sounds really good. Let's put that down there.
I didn't expect that they did. However, I remember that all of a sudden one day we were reporting a figure where we had none before.
Well,
and it was very recently. And
no,
I'm not
well,
saying it's a bad figure.
But see, the 5-year facility plan study's been out since last fall.
And what did that cost?
$406 million.
But the final
And-
list of the 254 million with the schools listed and the millions of dollars for each school, they did not make that available to our group until 1 hour before the school board voted on that plan. And you can't
Yes.
expect people from the public or taxpayer activist groups like ours to look at multi-page documents for 1 hour before the school board votes on it and comments
I mean,
on
the
it.
budgets are normally year to year, and that's what that
absolutely.
are available.
But,
They start the budgetary process in. You could, Steve, you could tell me better. In early spring, the initial figures come out. It goes through the mill levy, has to be set by a certain time. I think mid-July, something
correct.
like that. So,
Well, by
so
September,
I, you know, the
September 20th.
you know the ejections of the world that that used to come out.
Can I make a point,
have
though,
it.
in regard to this? Again, I think we get off on this whole debate about timing and everything else.
Okay, and then we'll
Correct
close.
me if-
We'll close that one and let.
But correct
some
me if
people
I'm
adjourn.
wrong, Doug. I have heard you say that the people that you represent would be quite content with the bond issue if we took the high school segment out of there.
What we told OPS is that we would publicly endorse a bond issue that would raise taxes for only a return to the neighborhood school system and the renovation and reconstruction of
Which
those
essentially
schools.
says we'll support it if you take the high school component out. That's essentially
Okay.
what you're saying.
And the monies that would not be needed for the magnet schools and academies.
Okay, but the items that you're saying is we will agree basically in form to the bond issue if you take out about $70 or $80 million of it. But then on the other hand, I hear the other side screaming, accountability, we need time to look at this, we need to go back and massage everything. They're basically buying off on 2/3 of it to begin with.
Without
And we're going to wait another year so the public can deliberate on another $60 or $70 million and not have faith on the people who did put this together and say this is an integral part of this entire plan. It's not like they're saying, hey, we don't want to spend anything. They're almost conceding $175 million already.
No, we're not.
Well-
The return to the neighborhood schools that was documented for us came in between 115 million and 120 million. That's a far cry from 254 million.
What about the issue of the academies and the magnet schools? We've had very successful magnet school programs. To the best of my knowledge, unless we've been under some bizarre
True.
cloud.
That's a correct statement. to
that's
my
true.
knowledge.
But you see, the magnet schools as envisioned by this bond issue are not the magnet schools that we've had historically. Magnet schools historically are for children to go to for a specialized education like accelerated
Science, computers.
advanced math, computers. But what the McKeel plan wants to do is use it for social engineering, quote unquote, to bus kids from clear across town to go to a magnet school.
But they do that now. They bus kids. I mean,
But you don't have to. Other cities don't bus kids clear across town to go to magnet
Okay, let's try to get
schools.
this magnet school thing. Historically, they are sort of specialized
there were-
learning experiences.
And these will be. The parents of the school district participated in a survey where they were asked what please provide us with what types of magnets you would like in your particular areas.
And
and-
the answer is?
Well, there is no answer yet, and the magnets won't be in place next year. I mean, this is a 5
So
to
will
7 year
there be
process.
time to massage that with
Absolute-
public input?
Well, there will
no.
be time. There will, yeah, the almost
As to what the magnet schools will,
absolutely,
what
absolutely.
programs?
There will be the board will have to publicly adopt what those magnets are going to do. There'll be discussion on that. They've already begun the process of soliciting input from parents. On
There's
what
been
the
talk
needs
about a
are.
fine arts.
You can see that
magnet.
the implementation of these promises has not been thought through clearly, but the promises have been made glibly. Okay, this is
Well, I
just.
mean, there
this is,
does
no,
have to be time.
No, there is
I
no
don't know.
excuse for someone saying, "I'm going to change the character of the school system, but I don't know how I'm going to change it.
We
But will
know
you please
how we're
pay me
changing
before?"
it.
I know how you're going to change it. Essentially, how you're going to change it is by rebuilding an archaic system of buildings which no longer serve the needs of the community, which is ethnically more diverse, and you put no emphasis on its diversity. You have withdrawn from emphasis on diversity.
Absolutely and categorically untrue.
Oh,
Let's go to the choice
Untrue.
zones. Let's go to the category of the
Untrue.
choice zones. While choice
Untrue.
zones wind out to be statistically racially balanced, individual schools within the system, within choice systems are frequently 91, 92, 89, 88, 85% minority. In the South, they tend to be 55, 59, 70% Hispanic. And in the West, they tend to be between the 80s and the 100s white. Please don't tell me that there's an integrative aspect to this. Everyone is
absolutely.
returning to their neighborhood,
Okay.
and you have no need to return to a magnet school if you have a brand new neighborhood school.
Simple question to what was just stated. Rebuilding archaic schools and not getting the results we want. North High School is an archaic school. The building is archaic. North High School was in a blighted area that nobody would go near a number of years ago. I ask anyone to travel out to 38th and Ames Street and look at North High School. That's a magnet school. I'm not an administrator. I don't know every program that goes on. But that's an incorrect statement to say that you take an archaic building and fix it up and make it desirable for kids of all races to attend and not have a success story.
And the
We've
high
got
school, yeah.
a number of those.
And the high schools, I mean, this question of choice is really something fundamental. We don't have mandatory busing at the high school level, yet we achieve integration through choice.
all right, this is one other question that a parent had, is that assuming you have the neighborhood schools, and they're so nice that people want to, they want their kids, they want to be close, all the things we wanted to get back to that we moaned about during all those years of busing kids around. And a bunch of the schools in Southeast are primarily Hispanic, and a bunch of the schools in the Northeast are primarily black, and the schools in the Northwest and the Southwest are primarily white. Then the issue of desegregation, is that going to be one of the litmus tests for the success of this program? Do we still have to integrate to meet whatever court requirements are?
We're not under court edict any longer.
We are not. We are
But
not.
you see, the OPS plan, by busing all these minority kids all over town to the magnet schools, the superintendent, I think, is using that as
Won't you
protection
be busing
money.
white kids too? I mean,
Oh,
that's how the magnet
absolutely.
schools
That's
work.
how it's-
But what about the issue of those neighborhood schools?
Well, I think the issue first and foremost is there equity first throughout the district. That's the question I'm going to ask first, not what the racial composition necessarily is. Because both sides, or all sides, strive and want equity. They want the utmost quality in any school we have.
One of the things that I noted over the years in the discussion of how are we ever going to change the plan was that a number, and I will take African Americans primarily because at this time, through this period, we didn't have as many Hispanics, and then the number has grown.
And they're the
And
only
they-
ones covered in the DSEG plan.
Right. They would say, we could settle for going back to the way it was if A, the schools are in as good a shape as the schools out west, and B, that we know that the teachers are as good, the materials are as good, and the computers or whatever newfangled things are as good. And is that going to happen?
87% of the monies allocated in this bond issue will be spent east of 60th Street. And let's just clarify one statement that was made before. Yes, there's been building out west, but a majority of the money that's been spent over the last 25 years by the Omaha Public Schools has been east of 60th Street in major capital improvements, building of new schools. Picot and Fullerton are not the only new schools in the district. We have Kiewit, we have North, we have those.
Well, and there's
So-
been rehabbing
Could I,
and retrofitting.
could I
as well.
address the larger questions, though, about, the first question is, do we have blacks, whites, do we have homogeneous populations in these schools?
do we need them?
Yes, we
I don't
do.
know.
So I'm saying, okay, the first thing is, if the school, I happen to be the parent of a multicultural family, so if the school for the last 22 years has been the vehicle for integration or desegregation, would you concede that?
Sure.
And so who makes up the difference when the school backs out of that business? Do the people who are on your board account for a serious number of black senior executives? Or where then does my son, where do blacks on the east side see a more affluent, a more successful, a more educated
They have the choice to
lifestyle?
send their children out west.
But
Just like
how
you.
many
They
of
won't
us are
all
going
have
to
the choice.
how many
yes,
of
they
us are
will.
going to opt
But
out
it's
of
a
it?
lottery. What
no,
I'm
it's not.
saying
No. There's 7 to 10 students, 7 to 10 choices that if they don't want to attend their neighborhood school, they have 7 to 10 choices within the zone, and they could choose all out west. The only way it becomes a lottery is if there are more requests than there are seats available, and then it's a blind lottery. It's not racial tested. It's not any of that. But the schools, I mean, let's talk about. There's the issue is like, well, what if everybody decided to stay at this school? Well, the reality is everybody's not deciding to stay at the same schools. People choose to send their children to different schools other than their neighborhood for a variety of reasons.
Variety of reasons.
Could
I
you
may not
list
like
3
the-
of those for
How do
me?
we
Sure.
do it right
I
now?
would like 3 of those.
How do we do it right now in the secondary schools?
Could I have 3 of those?
No, answer my
now?
question. How is
Pardon?
it done successfully right now in the secondary
You take
schools?
larger geographic areas and fewer facilities, therefore the geographic areas are naturally more diverse and feed into a school system which is curriculum specific. What you're doing
let me
here
give
is
you 3
taking the homes and you're breaking the buildings smaller and moving them back into the basest form of human existence in urban existence, which is neighborhoods.
Let me answer your question. You asked for 3 specific examples. I'll give you 3 specific examples. The first example is they choose for integration purposes. You've indicated, and I'm looking forward to seeing what school you've chosen for your children, because in several of these forums, you've indicated how important it is for you to have your children educated in a multicultural environment, and so you have a choice to send your students into the heart of North Omaha, and I hope that you'll choose to do that.
And I
The
hope when you
second
have
is
yours, you do the same.
transportation. The second is transportation. There are a number of people who are choosing to send their student not to the neighborhood school, but to a school that's further away because they would get free transportation.
Whereas they wouldn't
Whereas
with
they
them.
would not if they lived 1.4 miles from school and they chose the neighborhood one. Then they'd have to provide transportation. But if they chose one that's 1.7 miles away, that's the second one. The third example I would give is you don't like the principal, you don't like the teachers, you're dissatisfied. And that's really something to address the concerns that we've talked about in North Omaha. And that's been in all the forums, the issue is quality of teachers. You can give us all the good buildings you want, but what if the teachers aren't very good? We got a couple of responses to that. First, you can choose, if you don't like the teachers here, to send your school out west. And Brenda Council said it best when she said, you can continue to bus your children across the city if you believe that the product at the end of the line is worth the ride. The other response to this is because we're going to academies in areas of lower socioeconomic status with class ratio of 15 students to 1 teacher.
Well, currently, as I read that World Herald article, which talked about the Belvedere Academy, which is currently the only academy in OPS, that they're 5 years into the experiment, but the test scores have not increased substantially.
right.
In fact, they're still in the middle of similar socioeconomic status schools.
Right.
That's right.
So,
and now
when we get to the issue, let's put integration aside for a minute. Let's put buildings aside for a minute, although that's brick and mortar is what's going to be a lot of the first huge wave of this. Let's put where is the guarantee that 10 years into this that we will have affected a change in learning in the areas of town and the student populations where we've had a great concern. Not that we shouldn't be concerned about every.
Carol,
won't,
before you move
because-
on to what you're going to get for this rearrangement, I think you should ask the question of how tolerant the general public's going to be of this. You have a fixed number of resources, and how are you deciding what is equity? Is equity the same number of dollars per student per classroom?
Well, I guess that's part of
or
it
not?
because equity would probably, the net result would certainly show whether, to
so
some
let's
degree
take the
whether it's
example of the academies, which have 15 students to a room, and my
lower
neighborhood
grades.
schools will have 27 and 28 now, or 22 to 28. Is that not an equity question that needs to be addressed?
It's already been addressed because you have 3 schools in the Northeast, Belvedere, Wakanda, and there's another. They've already downsized the classes. They have lower teacher-pupil ratios. The test scores are not up, and the academic achievement is not up, and that's been proved to be the case in every inner-city school district in large metropolitan areas.
Please don't-
Overnight. I mean, there's the most recent and most comprehensive study that's been done on this issue, which was just released last Thursday in the Tennessee public schools, showed a dramatic change from when tracking those students from K through college. I mean, that's where they went. That the students in K, and they just talked to K through 3, students who were in smaller class size, K through 3, were more likely to go ahead and complete and graduate from high school, go on to college, and have higher academic test scores than their counterparts in larger classes.
Isn't this, and there's just a lot to cover, isn't this a lot, besides voter turnout, which I want to touch on just for a second, isn't this a lot of the historical faith that the people have had in the Omaha public schools one way or the other? Isn't how they vote, A, how if they turn out, and B, how they vote, have a lot to do with this? I mean, you are real skeptical. You don't have a lot of faith in the process.
Why would you have anything but
But
skepticism?
you have faith. I mean, you must think that there is a lot of faith.
You bet. And let me just speak firsthand then when we talk about faith. First of all, historically, the voters in Omaha Public School District have never let the Omaha Public School District down. Since the 1920s, there have been at least 4 or 5 bond issues that people have been asked to step up to the plate, and they have for OPS. Secondly, results, let's talk about that. Personally, I've had 3 children who have gone or continue to go through the Omaha Public Schools. They have gone on, thank goodness, to be quite successful, and a lot of it is based upon the core education they had. Go around Omaha with successful businessmen and talk to them who are graduates and products of the Omaha Public School System, who have children the same way. I think you'll universally hear from people that basically Omaha Public Schools has been a resounding success, and it continues to be. I don't like to drop names, but Warren Buffett has made it a point to step forward during this bond election. And Warren gets enough publicity, so I'm sure he could have saved this for something else. But he believes so strongly in the public school system, and to go a step further, so strongly in what Omaha Public Schools represents. Isn't that enough testimony to say, hey, we're not here to try and convince people to do something that really isn't the right thing to do?
Well, Warren Buffett can afford to pay a few hundred more tax dollars a year on his house, right, compared to Joe Lunchbucket, who's barely making ends meet. And I think the credibility of OPS has really deteriorated since the last bond issue, when you had what I would term gross mismanagement. The real reason for the cost overruns wasn't because of inflation, it was because they added on more things after they got started. They had cost overruns of 67%.
When you say they failed, have you studied, as kids have graduated from the Omaha Public Schools, what they've aspired to? When we say they failed, it's so easy to say, hey, we failed. Are there a lot of success stories?
Steve, it's good that you raised that question on testing and research, because today
I didn't raise it on testing.
Well,
I said, in general,
achievement needs to be quantified.
have we failed? Are we turning out?
Achievement's important to quantify, you know.
But are we turning out success stories? Are we turning out future heart surgeons and brain surgeons and engineers?
I don't think you're turning them out in inordinate numbers relative to St. Vincent de Paul or Creighton Prep or any other school in
Well,
town.
you answered my
Let's
question
ask
then.
the question about, are we turning out successes in the at-risk kids, special ed, behavioral disordered, and low socioeconomic?
Well,
I think we've already at least admitted by the fact that we have a bond issue that we have some problems.
sure, we do, but you know, the thing that's interesting here is, I mean, the Omaha Public Schools does a great job with those kids, and let's not forget that that the Omaha Public School District is the district that has the vast majority of those children across.
Right. In other words,
the surrounding,
the challenged in many way district. I mean, I think that we'll all concede that.
Yes.
The challenges of education are many in the best situation, but Omaha.
But I think that trying to make this attack on the bond issue an attack on the education system is ridiculous.
No.
Yeah, I was a PTA president for 2 years. I engineered one of the largest private gifts from the SID over to my elementary school. I volunteered at least a day a month for as long as my kids have been in school, for 7 years. Okay? I have no problem with what has been delivered to me at staff level. But I have problem with a superintendent who previously claims in a resume to have a responsibility for teaching staff placement, which is a problem we admit to now, staffing, hiring, all human resources functions, all a problem now. budgeting all a problem now, and
They're
you
not-
want him to
they're not
orchestrate the
problems.
leadership.
I'm not-
Well, since I've
An
had,
overrun in 1988 when he was in charge of budgeting is not a problem responsible to him.
Listen, I'll make you a deal.
Okay.
You can assign. You can worry about fixing the blame. I'll worry about fixing the problem. You can blame
Then get
whoever
a
you
different
want to.
plumber in to fix the
no, but you
problem,
know
would
the
say plumber
this,
with
I
Mr.
think
Biller
this
around.
this has become. I think this has become very much an issue for some folks about the superintendent. But I suggest that we should look at the superintendent and what he has done in the 2 years he's taken over. Look at people have been
He
calling
instituted
for,
pack rooms.
But people have been calling.
That's what the
for-
board cited
people
to
have
me
been
as
calling
their as
for
his
the
single largest
elimination of
achievement.
mandatory busing for years. This is the first superintendent who's had the strength to come forward and do that.
But
he
if-
has reduced the. People have been crying. Doug, you and Ed Jackson and others have been calling, and me as a Republican have been saying for years. The Omaha Public Schools top-heavy in administration. They had when he took over, there were 123 certificated administrators at the tax center. Today, there are 78. He's reduced them by a third. This is a man who I believe has the right direction, has the right ideas for change in the district. And to make this a personal issue about him is,
well,
I think,
I think we
absolutely
disagree on whether.
It's not a referendum on Dr. McKeel. One short thing. I think it's a difference of philosophy, Carol. On the one hand, the education establishment says, well, you have a problem, let's throw money at it. Always throw money at the problem. The
Well,
new
that's
roofs-
kind of a typical rhyme made by people that are against any increase in
Yes,
spending.
but new roofs and new paint don't create enhanced academic achievement. What they need to put in the schools, especially in the inner city schools, is go back to a traditional core curriculum, and then you'll see the test scores go up.
Can you hold, many people believe that, Doug, but can you hold a bond issue that may do the job? I mean, that's for people that are voting to decide, hostage to a huge philosophy difference in how we educate.
You bet we can, because OPS is
Okay,
holding
then-
the whole return to the neighborhood school system hostage to the rest of this multi-million-dollar bond issue that we don't need.
we can't go back. And the bottom line answer to that is, the courts around the country are showing us that if you want to return to neighborhood schools, you better have equity, and equity costs money. That's the reality of it. It isn't that we're holding hostage. It isn't blackmail. It's that there's a cost associated with it.
But the
Once
money's
you get
there.
past the budget
There-
question, tell me where you're going to provide for equity. You have $330 million. You're hiring at least 104 new teachers in the academies. That's what we're told, right? 104. Then you tell me where out of $330 million, everybody's going to get at least as much as they got, but you're going to get 104
Well, it's
new
very-
teachers.
Let me
And
just
if there's
make a-
that much
I'm gonna make a
fat in the
general
budget, you should've
comment.
cut it.
Okay.
Concerning, we talked about the superintendent, we talked about policy. Answer your question. This town for a number of years has, one way or another, or one group has come forward screaming for somebody's head, particularly from OPS. And I think it's, as Doug said, let's not have a referendum on the superintendent. We have a new administration who has come in with new ideas, innovative ideas, who at the same time have extreme pressure and accountability that's being held against them, or at least up to them, by the public. And we cannot sit here, at least I can't, maybe you all can, and try and predict how every bit of policy is going to be implemented as a result of this. All I can say is we need to have faith. I think the right things have been put in place, and we need to have faith that these people in their wisdom, and who know a lot more about education at least than I do, are going to step beyond this once it is passed and do the right thing, do the prudent thing, spend our money correctly, address the equity issues. I can't answer every question right now, and people ask us to do that. But there has to be a little bit of faith and accountability here for the people that we scream to have changes for, and now these changes are in place. We've got to give these people a chance.
First of all, I think
the other challenge for us is to stay engaged in the process.
Absolutely.
Beyond the bond issue. Because you talk about how some of the board members have been there 10, 15, 20 years. What does that tell you?
Okay, let's talk about engagement for a minute. The forums that they have held, and there have been, what, 6 or 7?
At least.
No, not much attendance
Right.
from the general public that just came to get informed that wasn't involved in some way. What does each side attribute that to?
I think
Either somebody has every bit of faith in John McKeel and the school board and the plan, or they've given up, or they're apathetic. Which of those 3 choices is it?
it's not apathy. It's a problem of people don't like to delve into detailed financial things. It's tough for a lot of people. If you don't have a financial background, it's tough to read a lot of the stuff that the district puts out.
But we haven't gone into deep financial background here, and the forums
And we really
generally
don't
are
in
pretty,
our forums either.
pretty.
Well, I mean, what's in the newspaper, they don't want to delve into detail. So I think people are looking for easier answers to base their conclusions on.
Well,
I would
I'm
take- I'd
gonna
go the
put-
other
I
side
wanna
with that.
gr- I've kind of put questions to both sides, and it's not a matter of grilling so much as I pulled all the articles the past 21 days off Omaha.com, which is the World Herald's website, and they didn't go into huge detail. Usually the same generations, renovations to X number of schools. I mean, do you think that people's questions were all answered in these articles? You've read them.
Well, I've read every one of the articles, but I think people fear to get too involved in an intricate financial issue like a bond issue, because if they don't have a lot of financial experience, they just aren't sure, you know, who might be right and who might be wrong. So I think they're looking for an easy answer before they go vote.
So what is that easy? Is it they have total faith in OPS, they are apathetic, or they're hopelessly hateful and misunderstanding and are going to vote against it? I mean,
Well, first of all, if you vote against it, doesn't mean you're hopelessly hateful, Carol.
no. Oh gosh.
First of all, it means you're hopefully spiteful.
Toward this particular plan, not to any individuals and human beings.
Carol, if you belong to a neighborhood association meeting or a PTA or the Douglas County Republican Party or the Democratic Tug Pounder Party, nobody goes anywhere anymore, it seems. The public seems as though they've heard everything once. I hate to think they're seeing this as a straight-up tax question. It's not a tax question for me. I hope they don't see it in those terms. But there is generally no enthusiasm for this. The World Herald, I don't know, it's been a spectator in the whole process.
Oh, I disagree.
Except for purposes of endorsement. But, you know, I don't think that they've contributed really very much
Hey,
to
they
the
put a
discussion.
picture of Doug in.
And it was a
You
good
know,
one.
it was a
wasn't
lovely
flattering.
picture of him
I'm
parading through
not going
Dundee.
to defend our
They
mother
spelled my
paper here
name
in
right,
town,
too.
but I cannot remember an issue, at least in recent years,
Look at the coverage.
that has gotten the, what I would say,
page.
coverage on both sides as consistently as this issue has with the World Herald. And please believe me, I'm not plugging the paper, but to the contrary, every
Well, so,
night.
well, all right,
and
so-
it's not back page stuff, it's
So
front
your
page.
big jobs, you
Just
know,
turn
Doug,
out.
you've said it is getting people out, and you've said it is getting people out.
Our objective is to show people that they should vote their interests, which as taxpayers ought to make the decision very simple for them.
So you're saying it's money.
It's money, and people are just going to get taken to the cleaners if they vote for this tax issue or this bond issue with the valuations going up 10 to 20% on homes.
So you say money is it that should get you there, and if you're against that amount,
Vote no.
get out there and vote.
And I say there are insufficient safeguards with any quantity of money in this bond issue to guarantee that it will be implemented appropriately, that it leads to the goal that we're seeking, that it will be managed better. And I'd like to apologize if I gave the misimpression that I'm hostile to Dr. McKeel personally. However, when one has professional responsibility for administrating a department, then he assumes personal responsibility for what happens within that department.
And
And
he's done a
Dr.
great
McKeel,
job.
I'll
Okay,
frankly
we're,
tell you, I'm
we're
satisfied with
winding
my
it down,
kids.
so
It's
I'm
not
going
easy.
around the
Great job.
loop.
He's doing a great job.
What are you saying to get people out, and what should make the difference?
I don't frankly always want to concentrate on the money issue, but if it was brought up and the warning was given, if you vote for this, it's going to break you, I'm going to take the other side of the fence. If you don't vote for this and if it doesn't pass, people who are concerned about their values of their businesses and homes within the Omaha Public School District really do need to worry in the future, because if our school system does deteriorate as a result of not having these improvements made, I don't have to predict what could happen to the inner core or the central part of our city and the values within it.
Okay, and the guy with the button on?
This is good for kids. This is good for parents. This is good for Omaha. This is good for the Omaha Public Schools. This is good for everyone.
One
Vote
question
yes.
I didn't ask. You live in OPS? You live in OPS?
Yes.
Do you live in OPS?
Yes.
And
Do you
I live in OPS.
We agree
So
on
for
something.
the record, everybody does. The vote is this coming Tuesday, although this show repeats many times. It's the 11th of May. The polls are open during the day.
8 to 8.
I would hate to believe that either side or both sides wouldn't show up. This is an important record bond issue. I want to thank all of you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you,
David,
Carol.
Steve, Doug,
Thank you, Carol.
and
Thanks,
team,
Carol.
and thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Please vote.
Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health and Bass & Associates.